Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Cauwelier. I had the honor of delivering the first session of the 2025 KMGN Knowledge Management Global Network program on teamwork and team psychological safety. It was a good session with 60 participants. Unfortunately, there was an issue with the actual recording video, which was lost. That's why I'm now redoing in a shortened version the key messages that I shared that day. I'm alone, though. There is no participants, so we do not have the participant interaction. I hope, though, that this video recording will be useful for those who missed the first session or those who want to catch up and view the content again. So my focus in all my work is on teams, team performance, high-performance teams. I like to use the example of Steve Jobs, who's very known for his technical creativity, innovation, but he was the first to admit that really when it comes to creating innovation, developing new products and services, it all depends on the team that he works with. A few data points or teams on teams. Many of us spend most of our time working with others. The days of working alone, remotely maybe in an individual task-based role are long gone. Organizations are aware and communicate that teams, collaboration, synergy are important for their success. They often put it in their missions or values. And people believe that teamwork is now more important than ever. Now, when I use the word high-performance teams, sometimes people get the notion about, okay, let's all form a good bond and get along well. That is valuable, but it is not the key. The key of high-performance teams is the word performance. And depending on the type of team I work with, that performance can fall in different categories. For a manufacturing team, it would be, making decisions faster or doing changeovers faster. For the context of this program, we're going to look at the last element here on my slide, which is improving and innovating continuously, using the intelligence of the team to the best effect to come up with innovations. Now, despite all the interest in high-performance teams, the reality is that when you ask team members themselves, only 10% rate their own team as being a high-performance team. So there's a lot of room for improvement. There is many teams out there. When we actually ask people about their experience when it comes to teams, more often than not, people talk about not so good experiences than, on the other hand, experiences with excellent high-performance teams. And so the framework I introduced in my session is this one from Professor Edmondson. She demonstrated and published 25 years ago her model around team psychological safety. She's the one to define team psychological safety. I'll come to that definition in a minute. Her model is that team psychological safety is key for team learning, and team learning in turn drives team performance. She validated her model with cardiac surgery teams that had to practice a new surgery method, but her research has been duplicated many times since in all different kinds of contexts. So the model is not context or industry specific. So the key is that if we want teams to learn and to improve their performance, to be innovative, to create shared intelligence and use that shared intelligence, what lies at the root of that is this idea of team psychological safety. I myself came across the term team psychological safety when I did my own doctoral research. I actually adapted Professor Edmondson's model as shown here. I assessed in my research and published articles related to that we will make available as part of the program, to not look at team performance in general, but at team knowledge, to see to what extent this team psychological safety affects the team's learning, and then to what extent the team knowledge, the shared intelligence of a team is impacted. So I was able to validate that model, which was, of course, inspired on Professor Edmondson's original research. Now, going back to Professor Edmondson's model, this is her definition of team psychological safety, a shared belief by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So the key word here is interpersonal risk-taking. And during the session, we asked participants to kind of key in the chat box what they understand by interpersonal risk-taking. It's clear interpersonal means with other people, but it's taking a risk. It's doing something where you're not sure about the outcome. That's the definition of a risk. You do it because you hope for the positive outcome that is associated with that risk, but you are aware that you could actually end up with the negative outcome. And so when people answered in the chat box, they really understood clearly what interpersonal risks means like. And in this slide, I show a few other examples, and the list is, of course, not exhaustive. These are examples about taking interpersonal risk. And you can imagine when it comes to building team knowledge, team intelligence, or creating innovation, that these behaviors are critical. If people are not comfortable to behave in this way, then for sure the team will not be able to fully develop. The next thing I emphasize is that these behaviors are half of the picture or one side of the coin. It's one thing to demonstrate or express or act out these behaviors, but what really counts is how the team reacts to those behaviors. And I took the comparison with Newton's law of for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And actually team psychological safety is that. Team psychological safety is an interpersonal risk I take with the members of my team, and I just listed some examples on the previous slide, but then what happens within that team? How do they react to me taking that interpersonal risk? Do they react positively and inquire about why I say this, why I think that? In other words, do they create a positive level of team psychological safety? If that's the case, I and others will be encouraged to continue taking those interpersonal risks, helping the team move forward. If, on the other hand, the team reacts in the opposite way, makes fun of me, ignores me, or gossips about the interpersonal risk I just took, then for sure I will have become a bit wiser and I will not make that same mistake again. I will not take the same interpersonal risks within this team again. And others in the team will quickly learn the same way that this is not accepted, this is not looked upon positively. So the risk-taking, the interpersonal risk-taking will very quickly disappear in a context where there's a lower level of team psychological safety. Team psychological safety, as defined by Professor Edmondson, exists for more than 25 years, but it remained in academic circles for a long time, until Google launched its internal project called Project Aristotle to find out why some teams within Google, the research was only limited to Google teams, why some teams at Google are really high-performance teams and others are struggling. So they called the project Project Aristotle, for the Greek philosopher who said that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, kind of the idea of a high-performance team that as a whole is more than just the sum of the individuals. And this is the result that Google published end 2015. They identified 5 key drivers that are correlated with a team's status as a high-performance team. And you can see them on the slide, with the first one in a darker color being team psychological safety. And a darker color because they came to the conclusion that the norms that exist in the team, the way the team members interact with one another, as I just explained, the way they react to these interpersonal risks, is actually 4 times more significant when it comes to predicting the level of performance of a team. So this concept of team psychological safety really stands out as being the key driver for high-performance teams. So Google confirmed, like in a non-academic setting, although it was actually a rather thorough project, but they confirmed what Edmondson had been demonstrating academically so many years earlier. And since Google published those results, the term team psychological safety has gone a little bit mainstream. And it has become also, as I explained, starting with my PhD research, it has become also the key model that I use when I work with teams. Now, when Professor Edmondson measured team psychological safety in a team and she assessed team psychological safety, she created her own instrument. She didn't ask to the members of a team, do you feel psychologically safe? Because that's a very loaded term, and she actually created or coined the term team psychological safety. So she demonstrated in her research that to be able to validate the level of psychological safety in a team, she assessed through these 7 statements, and I call them 7 elements. So the statements here are exactly the survey statements. They're statements, not questions, that Edmondson used to measure team psychological safety, and I still use the same today. I added a shortened description because the wording is a little bit long, so I added one or two words to capture the meaning of each of these 7, and I call them elements. I call these the 7 elements that constitute team psychological safety. So reaction to mistakes, dealing with issues, embracing diversity, taking risks, asking for help, mutual support, and appreciation. So once we have this model, we can start to think of how we can actually help a team. I asked the participants to think about an actual team that they're familiar with, that they know, and to see which of these 7 elements would be the biggest challenge, would be the biggest issue. And people answered in the chat box, and I was quite surprised to have a big variety of answers. Pretty much every of the 7 elements was listed, at least by one of the 60 participants, as being probably a challenge in that particular team they thought about. Now, that's, of course, just a best guess. What we do when we work with teams is actually measure it. So I use in an anonymous survey these 7 statements, the 7 elements, and I ask the members of the team to rate them, to rate whether they strongly disagree with this statement or disagree somewhat, all the way to strongly agree on a 7-point Likert scale. And by transforming these answers into numbers, I associate strongly disagree with 1, disagree 2, somewhat disagree 3, all the way to strongly agree 7. So my ratings happen on a scale from 1 to 7. In the last couple of years, I have been able to measure team psychological safety with more than 300 teams. And this graph actually shows the data for all those 300 teams. Each point is one particular team. And I explained that the ideal zone is the top right-hand corner here, where the average is high. That means people answer, strongly agree to most of the 7 statements. But also, we look at standard deviation. Low standard deviation means that all the members of the team will more or less give similar answers, very similar answers. There is no big spread in the answers they give. That is key because the definition of team psychological safety, as I showed with Edmondson, is a shared belief. Shared belief. That means that we expect that within a team, people have shared experiences of these behaviors and the reactions of the team to those behaviors. So they should therefore have a somewhat similar assessment, evaluation of these statements. So the sweet spot target area is high average, low standard deviation. You see that the vertical axis has the standard deviation in reverse order. And the more problematic situation is where we have low average, meaning people will say, I disagree, I strongly disagree, and a high standard deviation. That means that there is no level of sharedness within that team on several of these statements. So these are the data I have collected, continue to collect for every time I measure team psychological safety with a team. I then asked participants, because the previous graph shows the overall level of team psychological safety, basically all the data, the answers for all the 7 elements by all the team members aggregated together. But team members in the survey questionnaire, in the survey that we do, answer for each element. They answer one statement for each element. And so we are able to map the 7 elements on somewhat different, somewhat similar scale as the one I showed before. That this time I added a red and orange and green zone. So green zone is those elements that have a high average, low standard deviation, meaning a high level of sharedness in the team. And the elements that are in the red zone are those that have a lower average and a higher standard deviation. And I asked participants to kind of guess or estimate of all those 300 teams where I measured team psychological safety, which elements on average would be in the green zone and which element on average would be in the red zone. And this is the result. Of all these teams where I measured team psychological safety, asking for help is on average, seemingly the element where teams overall don't really have a big issue. The elements where teams do have a big issue is reaction to mistakes, taking risks, and dealing with issues. We then divided the 60 participants in breakout rooms to focus on one of these problem challenge areas on average in the teams I referred to, either reaction to mistakes or taking risks. And I invited them to on the Miro board, so you can see the results on the Miro board for each breakout room. One breakout room looks at one topic. So breakout room number 1 looks at reaction to mistakes, but also breakout room 3 looks at reaction to mistakes. Breakout room 5 looks at reaction to mistakes. And breakout room 2, 4, 6 look at taking risks. And the idea was to come up with concrete, and that's what I emphasized, concrete actions. If you have a team where you measured and the outcome looks something like this, what could you concretely do with that team to help the team deal better with mistakes, to help the team deal better with taking risks or dealing with issues? So participants worked on this, and the results are captured in the Miro board. You can go there to have a look. And then as a wrap-up for the session, I shared, first of all, a case study. This is a team I worked with during COVID, in the beginning of COVID. So we measured, they asked me to help them because of some issues and lack of connection within the team. So on the left-hand side, we see the original result of when we measured team psychological safety. And you see here, taking risks and dealing with issues were the priority elements in the red zone. We worked through a number of sessions with the team. This was a team in the financial industry from Ireland. And about 7 months later, we measured again team psychological safety, and you can see the results there. So you can see an improvement in especially those areas that we worked on, taking risks and dealing with issues. But you can also see, that's why team psychological safety is not a one-time thing we do. We can also see, for example, that now reaction to mistakes seems to have shifted somewhat to the problem area. This model is not a one-time thing we do. It's more about helping in a continuous way a team deal with the challenges they're facing. And the last slide I showed to participants was this one, which is actually the complete team psychological safety model. We talked in this session, I talked about how team psychological safety impacts team learning, impacts team performance. We talked about the 7 elements that are the columns here of the Parthenon image. We didn't really talk about the foundations. There are 5 foundations that are shown here that make up this whole model. All this is Edmondson's work. I just make it into a practical model that I can help teams work better together. And so my conclusion slide for this first session in the KMGN program for this year was that 3 takeaways. First of all, team psychological safety is what drives team learning, which then in turn impacts team performance. In the context of this program, we think about creating knowledge, developing innovation. Second thing, it's not just about speaking up, which is sometimes the shortcut people use when they talk about this topic. It's equally about how the team reacts when somebody takes an interpersonal risk. And so the practical way to apply this is to measure team psychological safety and then see which areas fall in the red zone, which are the priority improvement areas, and then find ways to work on those with the team. We don't cover that here today, but I have a whole program to help with that, with tools. Also wrote a book that helps those who want to use the model to work with a team to have concrete ideas, concrete tools to be able to help that team move forward, improve the way it learns, improve its team performance or team knowledge creation and team innovation. So this is a shortened version of my session. I hope this is useful for those who haven't been able to join the first recording, and I wish you all the best with the rest of the program. Thank you.